It says this hangout on there is live.
Okay.
Cool. Did you see the event page I posted that had a bit more detail about why I'm doing this?
I've just found it now. Hold on. Let me get to it. Notoriously unstable.
That's one.
Okay. Hold on.
I'm just going to also, I might, just as an experiment, if you're all right with this, invite, well, I've just seen Chris Lethbridge has posted something to me.
Okay.
Either someone else I might speak to. I might message him and let him and send this link and see if that connects him in. If he pops up, he pops up. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Okay. So, can't find you again. There you are. Cool. So I'm just happy to just have as many conversations with as many different people as possible. Originally, we were going to do it as a kind of almost like a marathon call, like over the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that would last literally those kind of 3 days constantly. But Google only allows you to have an 8-hour-long call that's archived and then it stops. So it also began, what we also didn't want it to be is programming. We wanted it to be a live conversation. And it was originally around the idea that whoever's in the conversation is kind of responsible for keeping it going, and that there wouldn't really be, you know, a moderator or a chairperson or an anyone with any kind of, you know, notional agenda as to what should be talked about. There should, you know, it would just be the kind of hopes or desire that people would at least want to keep the conversation going and therefore contribute, and that people could dip in and out. You know, we weren't asking people to stay up literally for 3 days non-stop rambling at each other, but we were hoping that, you know, we'd gather enough people around who could just dip in for an hour and, you know, like a chat room in effect, but using this Google interface, which is quite interesting the way it archives.
Okay.
And to see what would come out of those discussions. Part of that, I guess, is because at the time we didn't know about the capital, and at the time we didn't know that we would hear about the capital this week. We were told it would be in July, but we didn't know it did at first. So not that that's changed things, but obviously we as the mill have to think a lot about our kind of organizational structure and what that means and how it maintains itself. And we're trying to kind of be as horizontal about that as we can. And then there seems to be these kind of bigger conversations that are going on around the mill that kind of comes up in like Maury's artwork in terms of the temporary custodian's idea about how whether artworks or places or people can be supported in different ways, essentially by a mutual group of people rather than you know, just the standard routes that we have at the moment, whether more people could be engaged in supporting artists' artwork or spaces or ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of also in Jen Wu's project. Jen's here, by the way, in Liverpool and in over there. Maury's not here; he's somewhere else. So we were just, these are kind of ongoing conversations that myself, Maury, and Jen have been having quite a lot, but also it's widened out into the whole group. And then there's other kind of things going on, like you've presumably seen Mike, Chavez Dawson, Chris, and Dave Gledhill's conversations going on.
Yeah.
So when you add all that up together, it's kind of exploring different routes of doing things, I suppose, and who can be involved in those. You got any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, a few. I mean, I was following the letter. I mean, are you referring to the open letter Gledhill published?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting side of that situation, in that I think there's a generational gap, and I find myself in an interesting kind of situation regarding it, because when I first started studying sculpture in Manchester, there was a definite divide between who was getting exposure. You know, there seemed to be kind of an old vanguard of Manchester's art scene, and there was very little spotlight on kind of younger artists and things. So I think one of my aims with sculpture students, with Condense Mayberry and a lot of other people, was to kind of make sure that we had opportunities to show, you know. There was always little pockets and little venues that were having student shows, because it was part of the course really to do it. But I think we kind of blew the lid off, making sure that they were important shows, or there were shows that people wanted to attend on the same scale that they would attend International 3 or the Corner House and things like that. So I think in a way what we did was make sure that there was a platform for younger artists. But now it seems it's kind of gone completely the other way, and that there's a large burning magnifying glass on young student art that might perhaps be neglecting some of the more established artists who've been in Manchester for quite a while. So it's kind of feast or famine on either side.
Just to be clear, you know, when you said about you know, a generation of artists that were established when you were leaving, who do you mean by that? Just so I could get a sense. Do you mean like Martin Vincent and Nick Crow and that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was kind of an old boys club. I mean, my tutor Dean was quite active, I guess, or there with kind of Magnus and Stu. There was what you would kind of consider the people the familiar faces, like the Manchester art scene being like Cheers, and you would walk in, and there was a generation of artists that were really the ones that you would kind of not so much look up to, but realize they're the ones that were ruling the roost. That might not even be the right term. I don't want to think of it as kind of a competition, but there was definitely a pyramid structure. You know, you've got your Pavels and Kathy Hoffmans and Dave Max and things in that certain area. But now it's totally different, and it's a lot more open, but it's a lot more kind of youth-based, where you can see the attention that's being brought to the younger students. And there's almost kind of a youth cult that's been brought to Manchester that isn't necessarily negative, but sometimes it's almost like youth is talent, and then when the youth fades, the attention is maybe lost as well.
Because I'm really bad at I don't get out that much. What do you mean by this attention on youth? Well,
I think there's more interest in the graduates now than there has been for some time. You know,
okay.
Well, I mean, not so much some time, but from around the times that Contents May Vary, and everyone who subsequently in parallel activity brought kind of youth culture to the furore, really, or not so much youth culture, but contemporary art by students. So there is a lot more interest, and people don't have to cut their teeth as much because the spotlight's already there. There's better prizes and things now for students, and I know like different institutions will go to the degree shows and kind of hand-pick the students. I'm sure there's been something like that that's always existed, but it seems to be more prominent now. And I think in relation again to Dave Gledhill's letter, I think perhaps he's looking at that spotlight and saying that perhaps it has become maybe a little too focused on youth, whenever there's still a lot of good artists in Manchester who have been here for a lot longer even than I have. But perhaps Dave's feeling a bit like the way art students were feeling whenever there was no attention brought to them at all. But at the same time, it's maybe about trying to find a happy middle ground where everyone gets what they need in a city that can still build on the cultural roots that it's got, as well as the strength of new blood and old blood that's here. So, but I don't want to start talking ideologically about building this great new hope of everyone being together in this one big art arc, like Federation House or the Mill or something, that I mean, where everyone holds hands and kind of has a love in, no matter what age they are. So I think I'm kind of maybe too old and busy to really start thinking about those kind of crusades anymore. But I think that's perhaps what maybe Gledhill's thinking about. And he has a point, but I think it's not so much about bringing the attention back to local artists, and I think I read something about it being DIY driven, and maybe you can't always make your own practice if you're trying to develop DIY platforms.
No.
You know, if you're trying to build a stage, then you can't be sitting in front of your own easel or whatever kind of tool you use to make your own work. So he's got a point in that, and says we can't all just be left to be DIY, because it perhaps dilutes the work, or perhaps morphs the work into something that's based on the practice of curating or programming, you know. And there's still a lot of artists in Manchester predominantly that would like to be makers of paintings, of photographs, of prints, sculptures, whatever it is they might do. You know, I know whenever in my history there's been a lot of dilution of, well, not dilution of the actual craft or execution of work, but sometimes when you're too busy organizing something, you get to spend less time in the studio. Now, in my case, I've always been able to execute the work I want in the studio, but how that manifests itself in shows, if I had more hands on deck, as it were, with some of the projects I've done, perhaps things would have been curated differently with more emphasis on the work and not the overall goal of the project, which has been a large part of what I've done the last couple of years. It's kind of project driven with an overall interest in raising conversations that kind of spread beyond individual objects or pictures and things, you know. So,
I mean, you were looking there at kind of how things are supported and who are the people within these structures that form the structure or take part in the structure. So where did you arrive at, if anywhere, with that? I saw the post that it was a year ago around now, the other day.
What, the Gledhill letter was a year ago?
No, your project, the bringing it ahead of Damien Hirst and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, to be honest, that was kind of a snowball effect, really, from having sold the credit card debt, and that credit card debt was really solely because I was a student who couldn't make enough money, or a postgraduate who couldn't make enough money to just kill that debt, you know. So if you can't kill it, then you make it your art. And so when I started looking at the history of my situation and how that it was beyond just my own individual experience, I looked at how closely linked it was to art. But where that particular phase of the project came to an end last October, it wasn't so much the end of that project and the things I learned from it, and I'd always planned on learning a lot from the project. It wasn't so much that I had all the answers straight away. It's now leading on to what will be the phase 2 or phase 3, as it were. So and that'll be with people that I met throughout that project. So it's an ongoing thing where new connections and new networks are built, and the ideas of economics within the art world and who's responsible for the birth of it and who's responsible for its kind of being tainted perhaps as well could easily be its savior. So the next phase of the project is going to be looking at...
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, a lot of arts funding cuts can maybe be attributed to the financial crisis, and then a lot of people point the finger at bankers. But then within my project, I've looked at how the art world was established by bankers who appreciated art or appreciated craft to the point where they decided it was something else. Adopting Michelangelo was a banking initiative by the Medici.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of looking at how there's a negative finger pointed towards that, but at the same time, we wouldn't be able to point our finger as artists if it wasn't for the initiation of the art world and all the things that come in go hand in hand with that. So there's a lot of associations that came along with that rebirth, as it were. So the next phase is to perhaps turn banking into art and bringing back a more positive light on what was the instigator and how it become kind of problematic for us all. You know, when you look at it, things like Frieze are sponsored by a bank, which obviously is a new thing. But now people might say that Frieze is this massive destructive thing. But when you think about the reactions against Frieze, more independent fairs like Sluice that we were in last year, there are positive things. And so therefore, if you get lots of positive outcomes of something that's reactionary, then is its core sentiment a negative thing? So is Frieze that bad if you get so many things surrounding it? And therefore that input by a bank, that's banking money that's invested in something that's a huge art world event that therefore affects all of us, that we all go to. I mean, I remember bumping into you there on was it the Sunday? Just before going to the Frieze Masters as well. So I think that there's always something positive to be taken from things that can have negative edges. I mean, we're all as artists we have to be quite selfish and prickly at times, you know, so that's essentially the same of anything. So what we describe as the negative effects of greed and banking and things are perhaps things we can attribute to ourselves and our own behaviors. So those are maybe things that I would like to explore within the next phase of the project by turning what is something that we look at as an oppressive, dangerous form of greed, but actually look at it as something that gave birth to our industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's one part of the art industry, isn't it? And it's like, if you look at Frieze as being the pinnacle of that, essentially, to me, it just looked like a kind of department store, like a freaking Debenhams, shiny.
Well, it did remind me of IKEA when I was there, but what was strange, that I couldn't actually see the work, knowing that it was for sale, and it didn't feel like art anymore. It felt like that kind of, I don't know, the set of shelves for records that I would much rather get than a Soloist, because I really need them for my records. But you can put a price tag on the stuff in IKEA, but because the stuff had price tags, well, not literally there you could see, but you knew that the premise was to sell stuff. It didn't feel like art anymore. But when I went to Frieze Masters, most of the stuff I would kind of instinctively think of as priceless, these things that are in churches and museums that are never for sale. And because they were for sale, it made it more interesting for me. So seeing these things that I just never would have imagined being flogged, they became something else. And the fact that they were for sale became an attractive point of my experience. Obviously, it was lit a lot differently, and it was nice carpets, and it was kind of a little more chic, or, I don't know, tasteful. You know? So I thought the Frieze Masters was a unique experience after having visited Frieze, both for the first time, in fact. So it was interesting in that sense.
I mean, I didn't go to the Masters thing. I had to go back to Sluice, so I didn't see exactly what you're talking about, but I think I can imagine it. But I think kind of what was really depressing about Frieze for me was the sheer amount of money sloshing around for the most narrow set of artwork I've probably ever seen in one space of that size. And it just made me think, well, and also, I don't know, like, obviously that's potentially an ambition or an aspiration for some artists, but I think, like, because I'm from a fashion background, and I think Frieze was partly sponsored by McQueen, wasn't it, this year? I saw a lot of McQueen things around. It made me think that when you know, as people like designing art objects, and I'm not sure, having rejected fashion for its lack of depth sometimes, it was really disappointing to see effectively what is a trade show for art peddling same ideas in their most watered down way.
Well, should something like Frieze be cutting edge? Should it feel like perhaps an excellent series of pavilions in a biennial, an annual? I mean, it is for people who can afford to buy art, and without offending people who have a lot of money to buy art, they don't always have the inclination to walk to the water themselves. I mean, there's a lot of there's a big industry now in leading a horse to water, as it were. People who introduce collectors to artists, as opposed to collectors who know how to sift through and introduce themselves to artists. There's almost an interesting role of the salesman, as it were, not of selling your own work, but being that bridge between the money and the water, as it were, the artist.
I mean, I think that's really important, but I kind of have a problem with, I think it creates a vast divide between the things that occupy that space, where there's a huge amount of money changing hands in one weekend, in effect, where these artworks then end up, God knows where they end up, on someone's mantelpiece or in a kind of free port in Geneva or something. And everything else that everybody else does that then has, if we is potentially reliant on public funds, and then there's all these other people kind of also then complaining about not having even those funds. So it's kind of like that, 1% of the wealth and 99% of the population thing, or whatever this proportion is. And I just think does it have to be like that? Should it be like that? I don't know.
Well, it's not a case of then art reflecting life. There's no cliche, but I mean, if that's kind of what's happening in every other industry, then why wouldn't it happen in the art world? If anything, it's bound to happen the same way in the art world if it happens everywhere else, because essentially art is just made by people and bought by people who behave or act in different capacities, so they kind of feed into each other.
I mean, I guess, I mentioned the digital thing in that thing, and I think it's the digital thing that has kind of awoken a kind of massive anti-capitalist revolutionary streak in me somewhere. And I don't understand it necessarily, and I don't know why, but I just feel like we need to look at it a little bit, because the precedents that are being carried over into the digital realm are the same as the capitalist structures we're talking about, where it's okay for whoever happens to have monopolized the structure to exploit it to its absolute fullest at the expense of everybody else, i.e. the other 99%. And so when there's all these stories flying around about kind of Google hoovering up all your data, and Facebook, whatever the latest one is this week, is about having your, browser history or something and selling all that on and stuff like that. It's a different sense of capital, and by just going along with it at the moment, we as this generation are allowing that structure to become the norm, because it's normal in every other industry, including art, including fashion, including science, including every other, capitalized structure, of which that's just about everything. But if we're going to kind of allow these technologies to literally reach into our lives and sell our lives on for Mr. Google or whatever his name is, the guy from Facebook, people. Just on a Google call.
Just the Bill explain everything about the sound stuff and everything, so that shows all the explain what to do.
He did do, but I think Jen could do having a chat with you. Okay. I'm not sure where she is though. Alright, let's go. And it's just like
Is it
in
not
contrast.
inevitable though?
Well, is it not? Is it inevitable?
Well, I don't. Whenever you think about the transition of society from feudal to industrial or into today, people talk about how we're moving back the way the class system worked during the Industrial Revolution was zero contract hours. But in a sense, when you think about this 1% of wealth, it is more feudal. But essentially, it's feudal times, but we have Wi-Fi and gadgets. I mean, it was just because we're moving backwards doesn't mean to say we're going to move back to living in straw huts and riding horses. But we are essentially moving back to the same relative hierarchy in a way that we were hundreds of years ago. And it takes, without sounding like Roosevelt or something, it takes a lot of sacrifice for an equilibrium to be maintained. The only reason we have free healthcare, education, social spending is because so many people were killed in the First and Second World War, and there's no way that the reigning classes could maintain their control whenever people have to suffer so much. So something had to give, and there had to be a greasing of the wheels, as it were, and I think that's essentially what social spending has been. But that time's past, and that sacrifice is only barely remembered. So it's interesting in a way that people aren't that. The people who kind of celebrate the wars the most are the ones that have the most to gain by forgetting it. It's usually, now that the older kind of working class generations are fading out, the people who are still waving the flags and the wreaths are quite often aristocratic upper class people who won't suffer whenever the public spending becomes to a decimal point. You know, so I think basically it almost takes for people to be broken before they become, in a sense, enraged to do something about it. But now, of course, with things like Facebook and Google Hangout, it's maybe a weapon to make sure that people won't be able to rise up as much as they had done. We're not really going to become Google Bolsheviks because there'll be water poured all over the little flames as soon as they're ignited, you know. In a sense, the First and Second World War, despite the kind of massive scale of tragedy, were probably the best things that ever happened to the poor who survived and were able to attain something for future generations. I remember seeing, it was actually in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, whenever Hunter S. Thompson made a comment about if Hitler had won the war, that's what this kind of circus bar would be like near the end of the movie. And I know it's kind of a corny reference, but there's a lot of entertainment in modern Britain that's quite similar to that. I mean,
Well, yeah, exactly.
Got Talent in a way, and some of the places you go to for general kind of quality entertainment today, as far as it's concerned, is a bit similar to what Thompson had considered what would be the entertainment of the Nazis if they'd been successful in establishing the Third Reich today. You never know. Maybe it's exactly the same.
That term you used, Google Bolsheviks, did you literally just make that up, or have you heard it used before?
Bolshevik? Well, I was
You-
referring to the idea of a Bolshevik revolution in the
Yeah, I
past,
know.
but
But have you heard anyone use the term Google Bolsheviks?
I don't think anyone's talked about kind of a Google Bolshevik revolution in my presence as of yet, but maybe it'll spread. Maybe I've just started it.
Maybe you have just started it. You've given it a name, therefore it exists.
You know.
But the number of people who were questioning or unhappy about doing this with me on Google, I was actually surprised, partly because I assumed most people had been assimilated in by now, which is kind of how I feel, like I'm in now already, so there's no point worrying about it too much, but to perhaps at least talk about it and think about it. But there seems to be a lot of people who aren't, who are kind of making the, conscious choice not to, for that reason.
Yeah, they're the wise ones.
But if you could, would
Not
you
a-
opt out?
If I could, would I what? Sorry.
If you could, would you opt out? If there was another alternative, would you use it? that somehow you felt confident had a different set of potential ethics involved?
I think whatever alternative it was, it would become what this is. You know, Facebook was cool to begin with, wasn't it? MySpace was before Facebook, so everything becomes tapped into. You know, look at Glastonbury and how kind of outside the box or off the grid that was, and now it's essentially like everything else, where it's become too big to remain outsider. You know, so everything becomes what Glastonbury is in a way. But Facebook, I don't dislike it as such. I mean, it's like a constant magazine where you know the writers and you contribute it to yourself, and there's no really good editing. But I mean, I try to keep abreast of things as much as possible with my scattered mind. But it is kind of frustrating when you see a topic flare up. It's almost like hashtag topics come up when it comes to politics, UKIP, whatever else. Everyone kind of flares up with these almost frustrating rants about them, and then it dies down, like Power Rangers or Monsters in My Pocket when I was in high school, in primary school, you know, or WWF figures. It's almost like Facebook has the same trend-setting things for kind of slightly lefty arguments that don't have any longevity. And I've been guilty of it myself at times, despite, as I said, trying to keep genuine awareness of certain things. But everyone kind of knows a little about a lot and rant about it whenever it's kind of lifted up as a checkered flag for people on social media, and then it goes away. And I think it'd be more interesting to maybe be more seriously involved with things, and that's kind of what I like to do with my work in a way, you know. And it's my life situations bring me into an informative state where I have to research more about why I'm in this situation and what the consequences might be, and why this situation happens to more than myself, as with my debt or with medical things as well. Then I'm more interested to find out, not kind of expert levels, but a lot about it. And I find it refreshing compared to just to kind of scroll through life. I mean, sometimes I could just sit and watch Facebook scroll by without taking anything in, like kind of moving wallpaper. You know, it's not really there all the time to be immersed within. It's like out-of-date magazines in the dentist. You know, you just kind of pick it up and scroll through it and then put it away again. So the thing is, I don't hate it. Not everyone, but a lot of people are kind of self-loathing about their use of Facebook. You know, and I don't think they should be, because it's just, we have adopted it and it's there like TV was.
I mean, I think all these things are amazing tools. I just worry about I just worry, like, imagine, say, if Facebook, if you paid to join Facebook, and by paying you became a member and a shareholder of Facebook, I wonder if you would feel differently about it, and if therefore you could opt in to have all your data sold or not. You might actually get a dividend, you might get a check every now and again, or a credit of X amount. But at the moment, they seem to be kind of finding really exploring how to monetize people. And I just think kind of we're clicking accept to all kinds of terms and conditions, just like just because you have to get on with this fucking Google call or whatever. And I just wonder if there are certain things that, in terms of structures or tools or knowledge, that should be kind of a little bit more commonly owned somehow, so that we have a stake in it, because it's us. You know, Facebook has no value without without us being open to be mined for whatever they find valuable. I mean, I have no understanding of what the value is. I don't think anybody else does either.
To be honest, I don't know if they're actually as smart as everyone thinks they are. You know, because, I mean, you think about the amount of mistakes that are made on global scale with wars and destabling. I mean, unless the destabling of places like the Middle East is actually a purposeful thing, so that there isn't going to be better managed ownership of the wealth there, I don't know. But I mean, when it comes to the amount of information that can be mined from us all, apart from maybe having computers that can form algorithms that'll teach people how to manipulate us further, like that experiment where they made everyone sad for a day.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the beginning of something on a Skynet level where Terminators come back and just make us all feel depressed and we kill ourselves, I don't know. But
the computer
it's going to be
depressed so that we kill ourselves.
Been back in time to depress John Connor. But, I think that eventually, whenever we're wiped out, Facebook and everything that's been recorded on it is going to be an excellent almanac for perhaps who's left to figure out what we were, or for someone that can figure out what we were if there's something else. You know, I mean, we're kind of obsessed with history programs, and any piece of information that can be dug out from probably extremely vague local town scribes and things that might have happened that day. I mean, you read an MEN today, and there might be a whole bunch of misquotes, or not so much the MEN, obviously, no offense to the MEN, but any newspaper, there's bound to be little inaccuracies within any story. And we base quite a lot of our history, including certain religions, on bits of information that have been written by dudes with beards thousands of years ago. You know, I mean, I've got a beard and I could write whatever I want, and then someone in 1,000 years could read what I write and dig it out of some terabyte storage thing and say, right, well, that's amazing. Look what wild things this guy did on that date. He had wings, really. So
that's why
I think there's going to be a really.
This call will be sat there, ramblings about stuff, which is why I found it interesting.
The movie Contact as well. They said that an alien race picked up transmissions from Earth, and it was Hitler and his speech, and because basically it was the first. It was one of the first transmissions to be broadcast with such strength because he wanted to go all over the world. It had passed out beyond the realms of normal space, and then they picked it up. So they kind of, when they beamed that back to us, this is a ramble about the movie Contact, but there is some good bits in it. But yeah, I think if people start looking for, sorry, I've got a phone call that's distracting me. It stopped. That's better. If people are kind of looking back at Earth's broadcast history and archive, and they find things like this, then it would be an interesting thing to find out what they make of what people are from now.
Absolutely.
Sorry, this phone keeps going. I'm going to have to just switch it off.
It's also 6:45, and I'm going to try and keep these kind of short, just so that if I do want to delve into them to remember something that's been said, that I don't have to go through hours and hours and hours of being embarrassed to look at myself looking so fucking weird and rough.
That's quite right. I'm sure if I ever see whatever that Contact ramble was, I might remember in a few hours what I was actually trying to say, but perhaps I won't.
Are you up to the Ryan Gander show?
Yeah, I've got an application to do for something, and I was going to do a little bit of writing about it to put it into. So,
is it tonight?
That's
Wednesday.
Yeah, it's from 6 o'clock tonight.
Ah.
I think Sarah Walters tweeted a little vined a little tweet of one of the pieces of work. So there was a press preview, I think, earlier on today from about 12:30.
Okay.
So, but I was speaking to Tim Wilcox at the Degree Show, and he said it was from 6:30 maybe, 6:30. So.
Oh yeah, we've got the Gander team, whoever they are staying at the Mill at the B&B tonight.
Okay.
So I guess that's what I thought they were up to set up in some way, but I guess they're just up to the preview. Are you coming over to Liverpool on Friday?
Yes, I believe so. I had some stuff to do over here, but I've not missed it in as many years. I think, the first time I went was, I think maybe 2004, my second year. I remember getting really drunk with Dave Mutry and some extremely tall trannies, and almost got arrested for public nudity in some train track running. But that's all a very big, busy mess. So behavior from the past, re-remembered in the future, present. That won't be happening this Friday, but I will try and get across.
Well, we've got Christine playing on Sunday as part of our project. So if you're looking for a mental tranny, then Friday's the day. But we're also doing for us on Friday. What we're doing is we're using Google Hangout to ask people who have it on their mobile devices to join a call while they're going around the biennial, so that we get one chaotic, bonkers document of whoever's in the call's experience of the biennial. Obviously, it's potentially a little bit like kind of data hoovering, because the danger is we might hear people's conversations.
No, that's perfect. That's like Facebook's new scanning thing, isn't it? Like Gene Hackman in the conversation, sitting in front of his Facebook. Will Smith just behind him.
So if you'd like to become one of our kind of Blackie...
Yeah, like Richard Bacon in The Big Breakfast.
Yes. We're not necessarily asking you to present, but just to have the call open in some way, so that whatever it...
Well, I can leave it on my phone and just go up and talk to people and see what... No, that's just sinister, isn't it? Essentially, that's entrapment.
I don't know. Maybe the whole thing's a little bit weird.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do a call, but...
I mean, we'll just experiment with it and see what happens, but I'll let you know and I'll send you the link, and then if you are in range, if you remember, if you feel like it's an okay thing to do in where you are and who you're with, then that's we'll just take it from there and see what happens.
Cool. Sounds good, man. Good luck. Well, hope that was everything you hoped for.
Everything I hope for and so much more, as always. Oh, I forgot to ask you, and I meant to ask you, what, you know, when we were talking about the head of Damien Hirst?
Yeah.
Did my contribution go anywhere?
Yeah, it was bought on the night in the auction.
Anyone interested?
By Urban Jester, aka Victoria Johnson, who's PR and comms and marketing for the Craft Centre in the Northern Quarter. So yeah, they bought, her and David Henkel bought your piece, and they bought Kate Jessen's sacking envelope. But obviously, as there was no head with Kate's, I threw in one of the blank heads as well, just out of pure kindness. But yeah, it was good. 8 out of 10 heads sold. Rather surprisingly, the two that are left were Axis Web and the British Council. Both were pretty good. So I managed to keep 2. So I kind of thought that I would maybe do some kind of anniversary thing from the project to re-show the work. I mean, having staged it all as a DIY thing, it didn't perhaps get the same glitz and glamour as perhaps like a Mag or Corner House or Castleville preview in a way, but there was always going to be the way with that kind of project, because I didn't want to let go of any control of how the project was supposed to be. So, but I think it worked well, and I was pleased that the Damien Hirst thing translated well. You know, it didn't. I wasn't trying to make aggressive kind of statements about Hirst. I wasn't trying to praise or deride. You know, it was really just about, maybe in reference to what we were talking earlier on about hierarchies. It was really just about looking at how those hierarchies that were established a long time ago still exist now, but who those people were. So a Medici banker 500 years ago, or a Medici Pope, or a Borgia Pope, they would fund artists, they would decide who gets talked about, they would decide where the work goes, they would give opportunities, and all those activities exist today, but they're different people. You know, yourself with the mill, Kate curating in the gallery, Alex Rubin collecting and also showing work, and then the British Council, obviously, and Frank Cohen, the Manchester Evening News. So all those Axis Web, of course, as well, Catherine Braithwaite, and Own Art. All those things, if you roll them up into one, you've got one Renaissance Pope, you know, but they're all very different things today, you know.
I'd rather be one of those things. to be honest.
Huh?
I said I'd rather not be one of those things, to be honest.
Well, you don't have to be a Medici Pope, but the thing is, there was lots of positive things that came out of their activity, which is kind of what I'm interested in looking at in terms of the banking fraternity. Like that Oscar Wilde quote's great, where he says that after dinner, bankers get together and talk about art, and artists get together and talk about money. So there's kind of a nice crossover there. It's like there's a nice juxtaposition between what we expect those two romantic beings to be, or one being romantic and one being brutal, but the romantic conversations held by the people who we in the outskirts of the financial world is the Brutalians. The new word alongside my Bolshevik Google rebellion.
Okay, it's 5 to 6, so I'm gonna leave it there. But I'm sorry it took so long to work out, and maybe with all that distraction, because I'm not used to it, I haven't really quite got my head around what we might have spoken about in the way I'd hoped. And in some ways, therefore, I'd forgotten. I mean, all the stuff's kind of come out, but maybe I'll think on this and maybe we can do it again at some point.
Yeah, that's fine, man. Absolutely. I've got time.
How are your eyes, by the way?
Well, I've had both done now. Last Monday was the last operation, and it's like the color. I've not seen color so vividly since I was a kid, I don't think, because I've had the cataracts for 4 years, and the first thing you notice is just how colors pop once the operation settles down a bit. Like I'm now wearing turquoise and orange tops, which is just unheard of for me. I mean, fair enough, it is a sporting top during the World Cup, which is fine, but it actually kind of looks like a lot of student modernist work, which is makes me kind of fashionable as well. But I noticed when I was in the studio last night that I'll never really be able to draw the detail that I had again without glasses, like the retinas of biro drawings on paper cups. But that's fine, you know what I mean? It's just I did appreciate that unfiltered relationship between me and the object I was creating, or me and the image I was making. I never took it for granted, but now that it's not there, I'm going to make work about it, about the new experience of color, about the process that I went through, and kind of like what I've done with all the pink stuff and all that. But I just appreciate being able to see again. But one of the eyes is distance, so I can't see anything. Like I wouldn't be able to read a phone with this eye.
Okay.
And then this one, I can read a phone, but it's only like within a certain distance that everything's really well detailed. So, and then when I'm walking around outside, it looks like I might have lost my 3D vision back then. So now I'm seeing things in 3D that almost makes you react the way you see things in 3D in a cinema. It feels alien. And now that I'm getting 3D back again, I'm actually just kind of walking around like an old acid victim, just staring at my hand and things like that. So that's quite nice. And it'll settle down and it'll kind of battle through it. But I'll have to get glasses for certain things, but that's fine because I think I wear them well. So and I look a bit more arty with my multicolored recent graduate modernist top and my Chuck Close glasses. Look like a arty bastard.
Cool. There's a slim chance I might jump on the train back to Manchester for the opening. I've forgotten about it, but it's unlikely really. So I might see you later, but if not, I'll hopefully see you Friday. Call in at the Blackley if you're passing.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get the address and stuff off Facebook and make my way.
Yeah, it's near the old cathedral, so it's between the rest of the biennial and the Camp and Furnace where the party is, the Old Day Foundation. So
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, so call in and we'll...
Yeah, well, I'll head there.
Cool.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks very much, Richard. I'll see you very soon.
No worries, man.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.